The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi everyone, and welcome to our webcast on Scrambling the Data Egg. You're listening to Robert Ludden, Vice President, Santal Consultants, and with me I've got two of my esteemed colleagues who will be hosting the majority of the presentation. We're going to start off with Jog Raj, who's going to be talking about the agenda and leading us through a demonstration later on today. And then also we'll be following up with some key points from Jeff Giles, our senior consultant. So with that, I do want to just point out that this webcast is being recorded and that you do have the ability to put questions into the chat box. So if you have any kind of questions that come up during the webcast, please feel free to enter them in the chat box and we will do our best to address them at the end. So with that, let me go ahead and transfer the next slide to Jog. So Jog, go ahead.
Great. Thank you very much, Robert. And a good afternoon or a good evening for me here in the UK. So I've been invited to come along here and do a short presentation, and we've got about 40 minutes or so. And what we're going to do is be talking a little bit about understanding metadata and understanding the flow and the movement of data. And that's what this presentation is about. So we've done the introductions. Most of the time, or rather 50% of the time, I'm going to be covering the subject matter here where we're talking about unscrambling the data egg. And there is also a section in here where we are actually going to be showing you by way of a demonstration exactly the principles and the points that we bring up during the presentation itself. And then at the end, we will have a summary and a conclusion and also an opportunity for us to ask questions, or for you to ask questions of us, and we'll do our best to answer those. So with that in mind, let's make a start. And I thought I'd just start off with showing you a very simple view or a form or something that we quite often can look at. You know, whenever we see information in a screen, we will get presented with information and data. And I'm often looking at this and wondering, you know, if we've got calculations done on here, what do those calculations, where have they actually come from? What was combined? What do these figures actually mean? So the first thing I tend to do is say, you know, try to understand the data, and to make sense of it, I need to understand what it is and where was the information and the data itself derived from. So there's an example here, you know, where we're looking at the flights, and we've got the Bureau of Transportation Statistics providing us with data on which to calculate these various statistics about the performance of airlines. So the point is, yeah, we can always get information, but we need to understand what that information is that we're looking at and where has it gone, where has it come from, in order to be able to have trust in the data that we're looking at. And that applies to anything else that you know, we're looking at. Now, this particular issue about looking at the source of the data and its meaning, it's not just something new, you know, it's been understood for a long time. And to extend our metaphor of or rather talking about unscrambling the data egg, we've got Humpty Dumpty here, and some words of wisdom from Humpty Dumpty is that when he's talking about things or words, they can mean just what I choose them to mean, nothing more or less, yeah? And Alice also says here, well, words can mean so many different things. And the last point in here is, well, you know, as Humpty Dumpty has said in here, which one's going to be the master? So the point there is that when we are looking at our data and the information, what version of it are we looking at? So everybody's got their own understanding in their mind and in their head of what a piece of information means, what that particular data means, what this particular business term means. And so what we need to do is to make sure that we are very clear that a particular term or a particular definition of data means something, and it's defined so that everybody has got the same reference for that, and so everybody is clear about what piece of data that they're actually talking about. Obviously, when we're talking about information models, there is data which is being collected, it's being consumed, and in between that, it's obviously being moved about and aggregated and collated and transformed in some way. And so there's a journey or a path that data takes. And again, it's very important for us that we understand that. And again, as Lewis Carroll in Alice in Wonderland is talking about here, he says, if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. So what that's telling us is that, again, we need to be very clear in our mind as to what the source of the data is that we are looking at, and is it the right destination where it was intended to go. Yeah? So the journey and the path is very, very important to us. Yeah? So how do we go about unscrambling the data? Well, the first thing that we need to do is to go and take a look at that piece of information, that data, and examine that and say, well, if we take, for example, in the previous slides, I was showing you about the Bureau of Statistics for the travel information for flights. If we take a definition, for example, like the average flight delay time, well, that's going to be the sum of the flight delays divided by the count of number of flights. Yeah. So in here, we need to define exactly what these terms mean, and even for the sum of the flight of delay times. Well, does that include flights that were delayed but that never took off, i.e. the ones that were cancelled? And so we need to have these definitions, or rather the constituents of the information, the data that we're looking at, and the definition of that, so that we can fully understand what that information means when we're interpreting and taking action on that. And it's therefore very important that any definitions that we come up with, we fully define those and we can disambiguate those so that we are very clear of what we're talking about. And here, often terms like synonyms come in. So, where we're talking about the same thing, but it can have be known by different names, yeah, or homonyms where we take the same a particular word and it can mean multiple things. Yeah, so we need to be very clear and define exactly what we're talking about. And then similarly, we need to be able to understand very well what is the data and the lineage and the mappings and the transformations that are taking place to the data as it moves. Yeah, so we need to be very clear and able to understand not only the definitions of those things, but also where it's come from and what's been happening to that data in its journey in there. So if we take that idea of understanding what the definitions are, what the information is, and the journey that it takes, if I go back to the original screen, the first screen that I was showing you, where we've got our form with the flight information on there, all that information has been residing somewhere and it's been moving along. So for example, we can say, here's the average flight delay time in my business intelligence system. If I want to understand where that's come from, I can trace the databases and the data mappings and also any transformations that have been taking place, and I can trace those back in order to get an understanding of where that data has actually come from. Yeah. I can do the same, for other pieces of data. And at each stage, if there's any data movement and any data transformations, for example, through ETL scripts or triggers, etc., we can understand those at each point in time. And that's great, because that means now I can satisfy myself that I know where the data's come from, I know what it means, I know what's happened to it, and I can treat it accordingly in there. The only downside on this is that what we've had to do in here is we've had to go backwards and trace this. Yeah, so we've done this on an as needs basis. I don't trust the data, let me go and trace it and find out where it's come from, which is fine, but it only gives us a partial picture. And the partial picture is the fact that what we've really got out there is a huge set of data stores, and there's a huge landscape of all these data stores. And so we're missing all of the data flows between these various other data stores that we've got out there. And so what we should really be doing is not reversing this, but trying to understand what data stores we've got, and then for each one of those data stores, defining and understanding what is the data movement that's taking place, and what points of movement is actually taking place in here. So we can understand one of these, we can understand another one, and that means if we get a complete picture of our landscape and all the data movements, it means that we can generate these or ask of these on a dynamic basis. So if I want to understand the data movements from a given system to a target system, I can generate it on demand rather than having to reverse and trace my journey on an as needs basis. So that's what we really need to be able to do, is to define each one of these data stores, each one of these data mappings and movements and the transformations, so that we can generate whatever we need to understand on a dynamic basis in there. So what do we need to do in order to be able to do this? Well, to have true data intelligence, what we actually need is a business glossary. And what that business glossary does, it expresses the needs of the business in a terminology which is independent of the underlying technical data. So you don't talk about, the fact that it's on a particular table and a column and any technical information. It's merely a mechanism for the business community to understand what their terminology is. However, we still do need to link it into the metadata at some point in time. What we then also need is a catalog of the metadata, and that's the metadata assets that we need. And again, what we're trying to do there is to define what each one of those metadata assets is, so that we have the definitive source of the truth, the single point of reference that everybody can go to. So if we have the metadata defined, that also means that we can go and understand what the mappings are, understand what the connections are between the data and the data movements and the metadata assets and all the transformations, everything that's happening to those. But to make sense of it and to hold it all together, what we need is a framework that can hold the glossary, the metadata, and the mappings and put it all together. Now, we can do this, and we can do this and as a manual exercise, yeah. So we can do this on our Excel spreadsheets, we can do it in an Access database or a Word document or what have you. Yeah, we can do it anywhere. However, if we are able to use automation to collect the data, to collect the metadata, to collect the movements and the mappings and the transformations, we can use that automation as a way, as an accelerator to help us to gather the information on a regular basis. Yeah. And if you imagine, you've got a large landscape of data stores out there, all different types of database management systems out there, many hundreds, if not thousands of mappings out there. They're all difficult to be able to keep on top of and to be able to document and to understand. But automation gives us a way to actually be able to accelerate that collection. And also the automation gives us a mechanism by where we can go in and collect the information. Yeah, so we can view the assets, so we can record the assets and catalog those. So it becomes both an accelerator and an enabler for us. So if we want to take those various assets, build them into a framework, what we're looking at is building up catalogs of the business terms, building catalogs of your conceptual data, your logical data, your physical data models, your data schemas, your data views, etc. And up here, what we're talking about is your business information model. So that's the language and the terminology and the syntax which the business is going to be using. However, what we've also got is the technical data models, and those express the information from a technical point of view and the characteristics of the data that we're using. But then if we're interested in understanding the technical data and its movements, we have to understand what the mappings are between the various data stores that we've got. We might have a data staging data store, a dimensional data store, a data warehouse, a data mart, a business intelligence application, and its data stores within there. And to join all this up, we can link the business terms so that from a given business term, we can trace through to what the logical data is, what the physical data is, what each one of these data views and schemas is. And we refer to that as being the semantic lineage. We're also able to understand and define what the data movements are and the transformations. And so there we're talking about the data lineage in here. And so each one of these aspects that we've got, we can define those, understand what the linkages are, and understand what the movements are. And what I'm going to do in a few moments is I'm going to give you a demonstration of how we do this and show you from a tools perspective point of view, what we're actually doing in terms of understanding and organizing the asset into such a framework. Yeah, so we will be able to look at the business glossary and look at a business glossary view. We'll be able to look at the metadata and how we collect it. We'll be able to look at the mappings and how we collect those. But just before we do that, I'm going to hand over to my colleague, to Jeff. He's going to go through the value of understanding each one of these terms, and then he's going to come back to me and I'll carry on with the demonstration. So don't go away. I'm just going to hand over to Jeff. Jeff?
Thank you, Jog. So as Jog mentioned, I'm just going to take a few moments to talk about the value of some of these concepts, starting with business term management. Now, business term management really has to do with the glossary, and the glossary really represents a resource of all your business knowledge. So it's really talking about what does it mean, right? Now, a controlled business vocabulary functions as a reputable source for the meaning, also strategy, practices, regulatory things, and other business-focused objectives. The idea here is that if you can manage the glossary, then people will trust it. As they trust it, they will use it more. Now, glossaries can be organized in a number of different ways, but quite often you'll see them organized in a hierarchy, sometimes called a taxonomy, which allows you to structure the business glossary in accordance with subject areas of interest that people might want to drill into. Now, Sandhill Consultants does have a pre-built universal business glossary that's centered around various industry models like healthcare, insurance, finance, and things like that. But the nice thing about being able to organize those things like that is to be able to look at something like product, which is a pretty ubiquitous term, and try to figure out, well, what does product mean in certain contexts? So a product could be a physical, tangible thing, a good, but it could also be a service. Both are really considered products, but we wouldn't understand that until we had a business glossary that would help us understand what is the meaning of product in what context that we use it in. And as Jog mentioned, there's lots of different synonyms and homonyms that can get in the way and cause us to have some ambiguity, which of course increases the risk that you might interpret something differently. So let's move on, Jog, to the next slide and talk about metadata management. Now, metadata management in this perspective is really talking about technical metadata. Now, technical metadata represents the detailed specifications about what data is collected and how does it get stored. So we're really looking at it from an IT perspective. We want to know, what is its name? Now, when we talk about what is its name, quite often when people develop systems for data, they'll use a kind of shorthand or an abbreviation for certain things that might not match what our common understanding is. So we need to be careful about how we name things so that we can locate them. The other thing is, what is the expected value? If I look in a field, is there certain values that I would expect to find? That goes a long way to data quality. So if you can control how you name something and what the expected values are, then you can increase your overall data quality. And this is all part of what's known as a data dictionary. But as data moves around, it's also important for us to understand the sources and destinations of how this data works. And Jog did mention the idea that we can automate the process of the retrieval of metadata. And studies have shown that the success of a metadata repository increases the more you can automate its retrieval and management, because the manual processes of harvesting metadata and curating it for the metadata repository is very labor intensive. So on this data journey concept, Jog, let's move to the next slide. that has to do with mapping of information. So as data moves around from point to point, it is subject to change. And the change can have a cascading effect on different systems, different regulations, and other things. So it is critical to understand the scope of impact when planning for change. So factors like time, resources, costs can all be better understood with a well-documented data movement strategy. So if you're trying to figure out, let's say, how much money do we think we're going to save if we consolidate some servers, it's prudent to understand what kind of information is located in those servers and where does redundancy occur, and how can we collapse maybe 3 or 4 servers that contain customer information into one CRM system. So it's important to really understand how these things are mapped. So now I'm just going to hand it back to Jog, who's going to talk about some of the business uses around a managed metadata environment. So back to you, Jog.
Great, thank you very much for that, Jeff. So as Jeff was saying, so far we've been talking about the various aspects of the framework and why there's value in understanding those. But to relate that to business projects or business use cases, we've got a slide here where in our experience customers have been looking at a number of different types of projects, and some of these fall into the category of data migration. So you might either be re-platforming, or you might have acquired a company and so you need to move data from one place to another. Data governance is very topical in that again, as organizations grow, the proliferation of data is more likely, so we need to be able to govern the data just as importantly as being able to govern anything else. And again, here we've got data quality as an issue. So again, people are looking to improve the quality of the information that they hold and are collecting. That's always something there which I'm sure everybody has experience of, to improve the data quality itself. And again, given the number of regulatory compliances that have come along, for example, here in the UK, we've got GDPR. Well, how do you demonstrate your compliance with that? So these are some of the examples in here of the business use cases that people have got. So I'm sure you can recognize some of these, if not all of those in there. So with that in mind, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over into the demonstration. So we're going to demonstrate what's called the Erwin Data Intelligence Suite. And that covers those aspects of the framework that I was talking about. It's going to look at the business glossary, so the definition of those terms and how they can be used. We're going to look at the metadata manager, so that's a module in there which enables us to collect the information and to be able to define that. And then we're also going to look at the mapping manager. And again, that looks at the various mappings that we've got in there. So with that in mind, I'm just going to flick over to my demonstration setup. So the first thing that I wanted to really sort of point out to you is that, again, without the use of tools and automations, remember when I was talking about being able to trace back from a form or a view or some information to understand and to have confidence in that data, we need to be able to go back and trace the sources of that data. And one of the ways that we can do this manually is to go into our database management systems, go and take a look at some of the tables that we've got in here. So for example, I've got the customers table in here. It tells me that we've got these various columns and their characteristics, and I can take this and I can store the information from here, put it into an Excel spreadsheet, put it into an Access database or something. So we're beginning to build a catalog. Bear in mind, that's all manual at the moment, yeah? And we can do that, yeah? But in the same way, when we're looking at data movements, remember when I was talking about the data movements? Well, again, we can go in there and we can take a look at those data movements and see the files and the ETL transformations that are taking place, which define those. So for example, if I look in this file in here and look for the mapping, there's a mapping definition in here which says this is a mapping between two particular fields in here. There's another one that I can look at in here, and so forth. Yeah. So there's many, many hundreds of mappings which are taking place in there. And if you imagine what we're doing in here, this is all a manual exercise, can be very tedious, laborious, very error prone. How do you keep up to date with it? How does it scale if you're doing it in Excel and so on? So they're all problems that people can experience when we're trying to populate and get our hand on the metadata and their mappings. So if we want to accelerate this and use tools, well, one of the ways that we can do this is to start off by looking at, in our example in here, what we've got is a business user portal. And what this business user portal does, it shows us the end results of those exercises where we've gone in, where we've collected the business terms, where we've collected the metadata, where we've collected the mappings. So this is just a visualization for us to be able to navigate through the content, to be able to understand what we've got in there. So if I were to start off in here, I can go in and this might have gone to sleep whilst I've been talking. So it'll just do a refresh in there, right? So here's my catalog. Here's the business terms within that catalog. So remember when we were talking about the definitions, I can go in and take a look at this and say, how do we define what a customer means? So in here, we've got the term, the business term name is a customer. It's got a definition and a description. It's got a data steward defined against that. Importantly, against this, we've also got the ability to be able to associate business terms. So are there any acronyms that are associated with that? We can list those in there. Are there any synonyms that we've got? We can list those as separate and link it into here. And what about homonyms? If we're interested in those as well, we can link those into here. Similarly, we've got the associated technical metadata. What's the relationships between this to the underlying technical metadata? Any business policies, etc. And we can view all of this information in what they call a mind map. And the mind map is basically the visualization of those objects in there, plus their relationships in there. So we've got here the customer business term in here. It's related to the other business terms along there. It's also related to these systems and environments. And in this example, we've got a relationship to the customer ID column, and we've got another customer column in here. So very quickly, we can use the assets that we've got to visualize the relationships and the manifestations between the business term and its underlying definitions and its usage in the IT landscape, against all the data stores that we've got out there. Now, this relationships also gives us the opportunity to be able to go in and look at that data, well, not the data, but the actual metadata itself. So double clicking on that pulls up for us the table, which in this instance is called dimension.customer. The column is called customer. It's part of these various environments in here. Its data type is this, its length is this, etc. So we've got the information, the technical information against that. We've also got across with these tabs the ability to be able to go and look at the mappings. We've got the ability to be able to go and look at the lineage and the impact analysis. Let's start off with the impact analysis, and what that's doing is it's telling us that this particular column is the source of two mappings. Yeah, it's also that did hover, so the target of two mappings as well. And if I scroll down here, you can see that it's the source of two mappings. And if I click onto this down here, it is also the target of two mappings as well. Yeah, and the technical information against those mappings can be visualized in there. We can also visualize those mappings that we've got in here in terms of a lineage. And what the lineage is doing is it's showing for us. So again, my apologies, it's just gone to sleep. So let's just close that and do that again. So look at the lineage. And the lineage is showing for us the selected object that we've got, which is the customer, which is the column in a particular table. and it's telling us that there are 3 sources of data that we are moving from the source over into this table in here, and from this table over here it's going to this table, this column in here, to this table, this column in here, in this particular data store, database, or it could be a business application with this data store within there. But what you'll notice also is in this data movement, if we hover over these little icons here for T, it's telling us that there's some transformations which are taking place as well. So that data is being manipulated in some way. So very easily, very quickly, we can see as part of this lineage view in here that we're taking sources of information, what we're doing to it, and where it's going. Now, I've deliberately taken a very, very simple example in here, but obviously this could be very complicated. There could be a very long journey in here, a very long and complicated lineage that we can understand in here by virtue of the fact that we've got the individual mappings within there. So where did this information come from? So what we've got is the ability to be able to go in and look at the metadata, to capture the metadata. So the first thing I need to do in here, again, let's just refresh this because it's gone to sleep, or rather I've been signed out. And what the metadata manager is going to do is it's going to give us the opportunity to be able to go in and view the information that, that we're interested in. So here we are, so let's sign in. And once we've signed in, what we'll see is a catalog of the information in here. So we've got the metadata in here. So remember those data stores and the columns that we've got. Here we are, we've got the operational data stores in here. Here's my customers table in here. It's got all these columns in here. I can take a look at the table itself, and we've got the information again in here as to the table. I can take a look at the individual details of any one of these columns in here. So when we look in the contact name, here we are, we've got the contact, we've got the data types, etc., the values for this, yeah? And so we can collect this. Well, how did we collect this? Well, one of the ways that we can do this is by scanning our environment. So in this example, this is set up as a SQL database, and in this SQL database, we've got the connection strings, we've got the name of the database, the path or the location as to where it is, the user details. And what this means is that rather than having to go in and manually scan our information, yeah, we're able to go in and automate it, so we can connect to the database, to the data stores in there, and automate the collection of this. And when we do that, that's how we've managed to pull in all the information about the tables and the columns and all the characteristics that we've got in here. But one of the advantages of doing this is that we can schedule metadata scans. So rather than just doing it on a one-off basis, we can do this on a regular basis. And it could be once a day, every week, yeah? And when we scan it, we can scan the tables, the views, the synonyms, the versions in there. And we can also version manage this, you know, do we only want to add new items, or take the existing ones and replace those, etc. So we've got the ability to be able to go and do that. And not only can we do that against the data stores that I was showing you in there, and actually I should go back in there and just show you again that it can be the data stores, but it can also be against other sources, yeah? So it could be the Erwin data models that we've got in our Erwin data modeling capabilities, or it could be Excel files, yeah, or CSV files, or Access files. There's a number of different places that we can go and collect that information from. So the metadata ability here gives us purely the ability to be able to catalog our assets, understand what that metadata itself is. Having that in mind then means that we can use that metadata as part of the mapping capabilities that we've got. So the mapping manager gives us the ability to be able to look at the mappings that we've got and the source metadata that we've got in there. So in our example, if I again take this example here, So what this is doing is it's showing us the mappings, but just before we do that, take a look over here on the metadata catalog. So this is the same metadata catalog that we were just looking at just a moment ago, and it gives us the sources or the resources that we've got in there. And so we can take these tables, we can take the individual columns and so forth in there and drag and drop those into the table manager here, which looks at the mappings. So each one of these is a mapping which takes the source table, the source column name, and it says over here that it's mapped to the target table, the target column in there. And in between in here, are there any transformations that we're performing on the data as it's being moved from one place to another? So this tabular view can be also looked at in a graphical view. And so this is a bit like, looking at the lineage that we were looking at earlier. And what this is doing, it's saying, right, I've got the F name, I've got the L name, and that's being combined and merged over into the customer details. Remember what we were looking at earlier. Yeah. And I can edit this both here in a graphical view. So for example, I can take my customer zip code and map that to postal code. Yeah. And in that mapping, once I've done that, if I go and save and exit that, let's save all that, I can see that the mapping has been saved in there. I can also go back to my mapping specification. And now instead of having 3 mappings in there, I've got 4 and another one which has been added in, which takes the customer zip code to the postal code over there. And then it gives us the opportunity in here to define and edit this and add in any business rules, any transformations that we want. So what you've seen here is the ability to be able to go in and create these mappings and visualize those mappings from the existing ones that or the existing metadata that we've got. Now, if you were doing this manually, great. It gives us the opportunity to be able to go that and do that on a manual basis. But remember the points that I was making earlier about the complexity of managing many hundreds, if not thousands, of these mappings in here. How do you manage all that? Again, it can be very easy and laborious and tedious to do this and very error prone. And we want to make sure, the content and the mappings that we've got in here are reflective of reality and not any errors in there. So one of the ways that we can improve this is to automate it. So again, remember I was saying automation is an accelerator for us. And so one of the ways that we can accelerate this is that we can use some automation in here, and we can run these codes or code templates as they call them, and we can reverse engineer in some of those mappings in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this example in here. So this is an SSIS reversing that we're going to go in and do, and we can pull that in. Oops. So select that, run that template in there. And in this template, do you remember the data that I was showing you in here? So this is called BI/SD flow, and we've got all the mappings in here. And what we're going to do is we're going to use that as the basis for automating and pulling in the mappings in here. So let's go in and add the file that we're interested in. And unfortunately, that's gone to the wrong place. So let's go and find the right place that we want to go to. So in here, we've got the cat assets, we've got the connector, we've got the input files. And so that's the one that I want to use. Let's select that, upload it to the server. That's been done in there. Let's click on that to OK that and save that. So rather than a human being going through manually taking a look at those mappings, we've automated it. And the tool itself is going to look at those mappings, look at the source data, look at the target data, look at the transformations which are taking place in there, and create visualizations of those for us in here. So notice in here, it says at the moment there are 0 mappings, but if I now go in and refresh my page, you'll find that there is now 9 mappings that are actually included in there. And so if I extend that, so here's the flow or the mappings in there. Let's take a look at the data flows. They're going to be a bit more useful for us rather than the control flows. Yeah. So where is it? Oh, here we are. Right. So the data flows, so we've got 9 entries within there. And if I take any one of those, remember, if I select it, it'll load that up. And in the graphical view, what we'll be able to see is the actual mappings and the tables and the columns and the source, etc., that we've got in there. So let's just zoom out just a little bit into there. And so we can now see the table, the columns, and the mappings that are taking place in here. And if we scroll along, you can see it's quite a complicated set of mappings that we've got in there. So just ask yourself, imagine having to do this manually. Where are the people with the skills to be able to do this? Yeah, and where are the tools to enable you to go and manually do this? It's going to be very, very difficult. Whereas this takes it automatically for you, creates those mappings in here, creates the visualizations for you, and just accelerates the whole experience of understanding your mappings and your frameworks in there. Right. Sorry, I can just hear a bit of noise in. I don't know what's happened there.
No, you're coming through loud and clear, Jog, on our side.
Oh, okay. Okay. So just going back to as a refresh and as a bit of a summary in here, what I've done for you is I've taken the framework where we're talking about the business glossary. We've created those business terms. We've created the metadata. We've been automatically enabled to collect that metadata. We've automatically collected these mappings in here. And there's a framework that we can operate in each one of those and join everything together so that we can go from a business term to the technical metadata to the mappings that we've got in there. So with that in mind, that brings me to the end of my demonstration. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand over to Robert to take a look at the summary and conclusion and take things from there. And Robert, just tell me when you want me to advance to the next stages.
Sure,
here.
We'll do, Jog. And my thanks to you and Jeff for giving us a very succinct and timely demo. For our audience that is watching this, when we go into a summary slide, we want to really show you that if you have ETL mappings that you're looking to manage, or if you've got business terms, or even if you don't have business terms and need business terms, we can certainly help you out with those business terms with our Universal Business Glossary. And then you obviously need a tool that can help manage and communicate that out to the organization. Or if you've seen through the process how you might be able to create the data journey of data lineage throughout the enterprise, looking at source to target mappings and data points, looking at the sequences of processes and transformations. And if the organization is looking to forward engineer and generate mappings that you can then pass along to ETL tools to then generate triggers and scripts. Obviously, there is, we're showing you one such tool that can help accelerate this approach. So with that, what we'd like to do is we'd like to have a quick single poll question, and thank you, Job, for bringing up the poll there. We'll actually launch this poll in a second. In fact, maybe I'll launch it now, and I can read it while people are clicking through. So if you would if you give us some feedback on the poll, just go ahead and click on the following poll. Basically, if you're confident, or are you confidently able to understand the origin and meaning of your data in context? So people are polling. I can see the poll changing somewhat. So I'll give you another second or two, and then we will go ahead and look to close that poll. So let me go ahead and close that poll, and then see if I can share that result. There you go. So we just wanted to share the results. So for those of you that mentioned that you're not confident in your ability to understand the origin and meaning of your data in context, hopefully you're on the way to solving that. We believe that we've got some options with the Erwin Data Intelligence Suite, with Universal Business Glossary, with the tool sets that we provide that we can help you out on that. For those that mention that you're somewhat confident that you're able to understand the origin meaning of the data in context, that is great news. If you feel you need any help with anything we have shown, please let us know. And for those that have mentioned that you are confident by indicating yes, that you're able to understand the origin meaning of your data in context, congratulations. This is a huge step forward and shows us that with the correct culture, process, policies, and tools, we can achieve what we're looking for. So, Jug, if you just want to bring up the last slide there, we'd like to, let me see if I got to hide that. So thank you, Jog. So basically, we'd like to ask anyone if they've got any questions, so please go ahead, put them in the question box there. And for our UK folks or for folks in Europe, if you want to have an in-depth demonstration of any of the Erwin suite, data intelligence suite, you can visit our UK website, or you can contact the info@santel.co.uk. Or for those of you that are in North America, because we will be recording this and posting this onto our YouTube channel. So for anyone out there that would like to have a further follow-up, you can go to our website, or you can send us an email at info@santelconsultants.com, or you can contact the number below. So with that, I haven't seen any other questions there. So Jog and Jeff, I'd like to thank you both for an outstanding presentation. And we're pretty much going to wrap up on time, and we will give the rest of the 15 minutes back to everyone in the community. So thanks indeed, and look forward to a follow-up email that will contain the PowerPoints and the recording. And again, if you need to reach out to someone, if you saw something you liked, please let us know, and we will be in touch. Thanks. Appreciate it. Thanks, guys.